Catherine said, we have a presentation to share, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. And it's really meant to be a time for us all to kind of informally discuss these topics outside of the official meetings that we have to review particular development projects. So we have some ideas on future topics for this coffee hour series, but your questions have been really helpful for us to get to know what you all would like to know more about, what you care about, what topics you'd like to engage with our team on. And so please do keep those questions coming. You can utilize the chat function, I think, and Catherine will walk us through the Q&A after the presentation. I just quickly would like to acknowledge Councilwoman Anthony, Councilwoman Harris, and Councilman Espinal, who've joined us today. Glad you could join us. Thank you for being here. Now I'm happy to introduce Bob Azar, the Deputy Director of the Planning Department. Bob, together with Chris Issei, who's a principal planner in our department, Jason Martin, who is the preservation planner, Dave Dos Reis, who's our GIS manager, and Alexis Thompson, the deputy zoning official, will walk us through Zoning 101. Bob.
Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks everybody for coming today. I'm glad we're here to do this in a more of an informal setting. So why don't we go ahead to the first slide, and I'm going to just give a little overview of zoning, how it works, and how we do it here in Providence. So fundamentally, zoning is a way of a municipality regulating land, and we do so for public health, safety, and welfare. In Rhode Island, we are required to have a zoning ordinance that is consistent with our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan is a document, if you're not aware of it, that was written over a number of years. It's an extensive look at how we plan to grow and change over a long range. The comprehensive plan sets the basis for the zoning ordinance. We're going to have this presentation up on our website in PDF. It's got some links, so you can follow those hyperlinks if you want to get to documents like the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. Zoning is adopted by the city council as an ordinance, and it has two parts. It has the book, we call it the text, that has all of the different regulations, and then it has maps that show you where all the different zones are within the city. Next slide, please. So zoning regulates land use. The way it's done is we have a map, as you can see on the right, that shows all the different zones. And then we have a table with numerous land uses. And that table tells you where the uses are allowed. If you see a P in one of these boxes, that means that that particular use is allowed in that zone. If you see an S, it's allowed by special use permit, which is a process of going to the zoning board and requesting the special permit. And if it's blank, then the use is not allowed. It's as simple as that. We have dozens of land uses, and we have all these zones mapped out. So fundamentally, if you want to know what you can do on a parcel of land in the city, you look at the use table, you look at the map, and you can find out if you can locate that land use in that zone. Next slide. Zoning regulates a lot more than land use. It regulates dimension, and dimension can take on many different forms: lot sizes, width, height, lot coverage, setback from lot lines, and every zone has its own specific dimensional regulations, and these are set forth in the text of the zoning ordinance in the tables that indicate all these dimensional standards. Next. Zoning also regulates site elements such as landscaping and parking. We have requirements for tree planting, landscape buffers. We have requirements for the amount of pervious versus impervious surface that can exist on a lot. With respect to parking, we regulate how much parking is required. In many cases, how little parking is required. We have regulations regarding aisle width and stall sizes and things like that. We also regulate bike parking. So we have standards about how much parking you have to have for bicycles as well. Next slide. We regulate design, particularly in historic districts that Jason is going to talk about a little bit later, but we also have different processes that we call development plan review. The most notable is in downtown through our downtown design review committee, and Chris will describe that in more detail. But we do have some regulations that speak to building materials, the distance a building can be from the street, entrances, the amount of glazing on a facade, things like that. Next. And zoning gets administered by a lot of different people. It's a complex document. It's got a lot of different regulations, and it takes many people to make sure that the regulations are being followed. Day to day, city departments administer the ordinance, particularly the Department of Planning and Development and the Department of Inspection and Standards. Some projects, depending on how complex they are, will require approval by a public board or commission. And these public boards and commissions have to follow specific rules to make sure that the developments comply with the ordinance and with other regulations that might be adopted by the particular board or commission. And we'll talk a little bit more about the specific boards and commissions in a minute. Zoning is a city ordinance. It's the law. It is legally enforceable by the city and ultimately by the courts if it gets to that point. Permits, zoning approval is a prerequisite to the issuance of building permits. And so before any permit is issued, there needs to be some sort of zoning approval that goes along with that property. The zoning can be amended. It's a document that is amended actually many times in a year, some cases up to, say, a dozen times in a year. Usually these changes are small changes to the zoning maps to rezone parcels, but the text gets amended as well. And it gets amended sometimes based on the folks who use the ordinance day in and day out. We find some issues with the wording, small things like punctuation or misspellings, bigger things, like fuzzy interpretations where things aren't as clear as they could be. And then sometimes there are more substantive amendments to the zoning text that take us in different policy directions. This gets amended through ordinance by the city council. There's a public process of review by the city plan commission and then by the city council. And at every stage of review during the amendment process, the public has the opportunity to participate in the formulation of the ordinance. The public can also participate in the review of projects. All of our boards meet in public, and with respect to every project, they take public comment. Next slide. So how can you participate? Well, there are lots of ways, and we found that over the years it's getting easier to pay attention to what's going on with the different boards and commissions. I always recommend that people go to the Secretary of State's open meetings site. You can find every public body that exists in Rhode Island, and you can sign up to get notices of all of the agendas when they get posted. Even before many of these documents get posted to the Secretary of State's website, we are now posting documents, plans, agendas, staff reports on our planning website, and also for the zoning board, those are being posted on the inspection and standards websites. The public is always invited to come to hearings. These days, we're doing all of our hearings remotely. Makes it very easy for you to sit on your couch and attend a public meeting. But whether in person or not, the public is always welcome at our hearings. With regards to if you want to speak about a project, it really is important to get an understanding of what is being considered, and what the board or commission is actually reviewing, and what their standards are for reviewing the project, what they have purview over, what they don't have purview over. Typically, it's not terribly helpful if your testimony is, I like this project or I don't like this project. More to the point is, does the project comply with the standards that the board or commission uses to review the project? So it takes a little bit of education to become an informed participant in these meetings. Sometimes it can be very confusing, but you can always contact any of us if you do have questions about what is under consideration and what are the best ways you can participate. Next slide. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the City Plan Commission specifically. This was originally going to be a slide that was narrated by Choyan Manjrekar, principal planner who staffs the City Plan Commission. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to pinch hit for him before I turn it over to the other staff to talk about their boards and commissions. City Plan Commission is Providence's planning board. Every city and town in Rhode Island is required to have a planning board, and planning boards are required to do several different things. First, the planning board is the author of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is ultimately approved by the city council, but it's drafted here in the planning department, and it's reviewed extensively through a public process by the City Plan Commission. And the commission maintains the plan and amends it, forwards it to the city council. And the comprehensive plan is also a document that is used when reviewing development projects. Next, the City Plan Commission advises the city council. Most importantly, most pertinent to this particular discussion is that any zoning changes, any amendments to the zoning ordinance get reviewed by the City Plan Commission, and the City Plan Commission makes a recommendation to the city council. They specifically make findings of whether a change to the zoning ordinance is consistent with the comprehensive plan and with other sections of the zoning ordinance that speak to the purposes of zoning, and those are passed on to the city council. The City Plan Commission engages in what's called development plan review. I mentioned that before when I talked about design regulations. We have several different processes that we call development plan review. The City Plan Commission does 3 of them. One is to review institutional master plans for colleges and hospitals. So institutions like Providence College, Rhode Island Hospital, Butler Hospital, Rhode Island School of Design, they all have to submit institutional master plans that get reviewed and approved by the City Plan Commission. City Plan Commission also reviews master plans for primary and secondary schools. This could be public schools, this could be private schools. Whenever they have a campus of more than one building, they come in for a special kind of development plan review. And then finally, the City Plan Commission reviews design waivers from developments in several of our different zones. These are regulations that speak specifically to the design of buildings, as I mentioned before, things like fenestration, building materials, setback, entryways, and things like that. Those have a process where the commission can review those and can consider requests for design waivers. One of the biggest things that the City Plan Commission does is it reviews land development projects. These are significant development projects outside of downtown and outside of college and hospital campuses, private developments where there's construction of 10,000 square feet or more of new building. It could be a new building, it could be an addition to a building. 10,000 square feet of floor area is the trigger. Another trigger is 10 or more dwelling units being created, or a large parking lot of 50 or more parking spaces. Land development projects are reviewed in a multi-stage process before the Plan Commission. The commission reviews subdivisions of land. That's another one of the mandates from the state government. Subdivisions of land are whenever you change a lot line. Subdivisions often are as simple as merging two lots together or moving a lot line within a couple of parcels, but they could also be bigger subdivisions that create multiple numbers of lots. We don't see a lot of really large subdivisions in Providence because we're a built-out city, but we do on occasion see some sizable ones. And then finally, the City Plan Commission has a process called Unified Development Review. This was enabled by state law a few years ago, and we adopted it locally. This is a process where the City Plan Commission can actually grant variances when it considers land development projects and when it considers subdivisions. So rather than a two-stage process where someone would have to go to the City Plan Commission and also to the zoning board for a variance, when considering these different types of projects, the Plan Commission has the authority to grant variances just like a zoning board. So that is an overview of the City Plan Commission. Next slide. I'm now going to turn it over to Chris Issei, who staffs our downtown review bodies and also our staff level development plan review committee, and he'll run you through what those entities do.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. So as you see on the slide here, we've got on the right, we've got a map of the downtown area, and I'll explain a little bit more how that works. So in the D1 zone, we reviewed the design of all buildings, open spaces, and all exterior physical improvements, which are regulated and approved through the development plan review. The downtown zone includes sub-districts for height and street hierarchy, A and B streets. It's hard to read on that map, but they're listed on that map. The zone also includes the Down City and Capital Center District overlays. And the downtown review bodies include the Downtown Design Review Committee and the Capital Center Commission. The Capital Center Commission also has a Design Review Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Capital Center Commission. The orange, dark gold plots of land is the I-195 land, and that is regulated by the I-195 Commission. Next slide. So downtown development plan review includes the review of all improvements on public and private land throughout the D1 district and the East Side Overlay District. This includes construction, reconstruction, alteration, repair, demolition, removal and rehabilitation of the exterior of new and existing buildings and appurtenances. This is everything from anything on the exterior, from a sign to a new construction project. These bodies can grant waivers and development incentives. Waivers we have in our design regulations, we have some waivers that are allowed by meeting certain criteria, and the boards can grant these waivers from some design regulations. We also have development incentives, which gives extra height if you can meet some of the criteria for that. There are some temporary uses allowed in the D1 zone, and the board can grant temporary use permits for that. And all these projects are either reviewed by staff or by the committee, depending on the type of proposal you're seeking approval on. Next slide. So I also staff the Development Plan Review Committee, which is a staff level review. This body reviews the following types of development for conformance with the zoning ordinance. Any development or redevelopment on lots or a lot with a total of 40,000 square feet or more that results in a change of use. All new construction of more than 2,500 square feet, including additions to existing structures within the C1, C2, C3, MMU, and W2 districts. All new construction of row house developments and multifamily dwellings. Any new pavement with an area of 10,000 square feet or more. And any development that includes a drive-through facility, gas station, materials processing, and tank farm. And the DPRC, which is the Development Plan Review Committee, meets internally. It consists of representatives of our department, the Planning Development, inspection of standards, and the city forester. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Martin.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jason Martin. I'm the preservation planner, and my primary duty is to staff the Historic District Commission. So here on our slide, we've got a map kind of showing this shows primarily all the historic districts in the city, as well as what Chris was just talking about, obviously the downtown, which is not under the purview of the HDC. In Providence, we have approximately 2,500 properties located in 7 different districts. For the most part, majority of those districts are contiguous spaces, such as the Armory District, Broadway, College Hill, and so on. We do have something called the Providence Landmarks Districts. In 2004, the city created what was known as the Industrial and Commercial Buildings District. This is a non-contiguous district located throughout the city that primarily houses what we would refer to as mill buildings. That's kind of most of the red you see there on the map. In 2014, when we redid the zoning ordinance, this was, we created something called the Providence Landmarks District. And what that did was create an umbrella district that had the ICBD is one portion of that. The other is called the residential district, and this includes various residential properties located in every neighborhood in the city, primarily, excuse me, which are a lot of nationally registered, individually listed buildings that were not locally protected and now are. The Historic District Commission is staffed by a board of volunteers that are appointed by the mayor. We have a set of standards and guidelines that govern how we review things. With that, the regulations allow for staff to review items and the commission. It kind of depends on what you're requesting. I like to say that anything that is kind of new or a substantial change to a property, you will be going to the commission for that. But most of the applications we see for things like repair, replacement in kind, and things like site improvements, things like that, fencing, is handled by staff. We typically do about 200 plus applications a year, and the majority of those are staff applications. The board meets once a month, although in these times we've been meeting up to twice a month via Zoom to keep things going in these busy times. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alexis Thompson, the deputy zoning official.
Thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alexis Thompson, and I staff the Zoning Board of Review along with zoning assistant Bupa Saf. I also act as the deputy zoning official within the Department of Inspections and Standards, and Bupa works closely with me in that role as well. Today, I'm here to talk a little bit about the Zoning Board of Review. The Zoning Board is made up of 7 members. We need 5 to make a quorum, and we have 2 alternates. It meets once a month, and it has 3 main roles. The first role is that the board hears applications requesting relief from dimensional or use regulations of the zoning ordinance. These are called variances, and they're basically a request to deviate from the rules of the ordinance. In order to grant a variance, the applicant does have to show the board that there's a hardship, which is the basis for the request. And the board has to make specific findings of fact in those decisions. For dimensional variance, they must find that there are unique characteristics of the property that cause the hardship. And they also have to show that the request is the least relief necessary. And in the case of a use variance, they have to find that the property may have no other beneficial use without being granted that variance. So as you can imagine, that makes a use variance fairly difficult to get. Certainly the predominant requests we hear on the zoning board are for dimensional variances. The second role of the board is that it hears applications requesting a special use permit. Bob mentioned this a little bit earlier, but these are used when the zoning ordinance allows for a particular use in a particular zone, but conditionally so. So the zoning board is the body who determines that any proposed use that's up for a special use permit will not be detrimental or injurious to neighboring properties, and that it will not negatively affect the health and well-being of those occupying those neighboring properties. And lastly, the zoning board acts as a zoning board of appeals. And this is from decisions of the other bodies that you've heard about today, as well as from any officer that enforces the zoning ordinance. In its role as an appeals body, the board hears decisions, the board hears matters regarding decisions of these other commissions, but it doesn't rehear the matter. It rather decides whether there was an error in procedure by a previous body. And in those cases, it either upholds the decision of that previous body, or it can decide to remand a decision of that body back to be heard again. And any appeal of the zoning board itself goes to Superior Court from there. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to David Dos Reis, who's going to talk about the extremely valuable tool that is our zoning mapper. Dave?
Thank you, Alexis. My name is David Dos Reis. I'm the Geographic Information Systems Manager. I manage all the city's GIS data layers and associated web applications. While there are many applications, I'm going to focus on one and show you an example of how to determine zoning for a particular address. So to access this tool, you can simply go to our planning homepage, and then you can click on this GIS and Maps link. So I will do that now. I'm going to attempt to do a live demo, so please bear with me. So from there, to access all our different web applications, you can click on this link for Providence WebGIS. That should pop up our ArcGIS organizational page. And once again, there are links to a variety of applications. I will focus on this first one. This is our most popular application. This is our Where's My Parcel, What's My Zone? So I will click on that, and up will pop our Parcel and Zoning Map. It's a little slow sometimes, but so step one, you just type in an address. In this case, I'm just going to go right downtown. We're going to go to Westminster Street. So some of you know this as the Turk's Head building. What we can do is once you realize that this is the parcel of interest, just zoom in, confirm that, and then you can simply click on the map. It will tell you what first the overlay zone is, and then it will also tell you, if you keep clicking through the pop-up, it will tell you the base zoning. And it will then give you parcel information for that. You will then have the ability to click on the property record card, and that will give you access to owner information, assessment, all sorts of different information about that parcel. Just a couple quick points here. I'm not going to belabor the point, but you do have access to a variety of layers associated with all our different GIS layers. So you can access those. You can turn on and off layers with this application. And that's just kind of a quick overview of the tools available to you that will get you this basic zoning information for each parcel. So you can do this for any parcel in the city. I will now turn it back to Bob, and he will close out our presentation.
Thanks a lot, Dave. I think that that gives you an overview of what we do, and understand that this is sort of a real introduction to the general concepts and principles of how we do our jobs day in and day out. It is fairly complicated, but a big part of our job is to try to demystify how this all works. And we spend a lot of time working with property owners to figure out what they can and can't do with their property. We spend a lot of time trying to encourage property owners and developers to come into full compliance with the zoning ordinance. We get them ready to come in front of our boards and commissions. We give them a sense of where we stand on the projects. We always write advisory opinions or staff reports to our boards and commissions. And we also spend a lot of time working with members of the public to try to help them understand what is happening in their vicinity. If they get a notice in the mail or they see a notice in the newspaper or online, we try to give them information about what is happening. We're here to help, and I think for the next 20 or so minutes, we'll be happy to have a discussion about any questions that you might have. And I believe that Catherine is going to moderate that discussion.
I am. And Dave, would you mind stopping the screen share? I'd love to see some beautiful faces out there in the audience. So thank you all. Many of you submitted some questions ahead of time. So I'm going to start there, and then I will do some directing, and I see some coming in through the chat. And you can also use your raise your hand tool. So I will kind of follow all of those ways to make sure that we get everyone's questions answered. And if for some reason we run out of time, because we want to be mindful of your time, I'm going to make sure that I leave my email address so you can email me with any lingering questions that you may have. But I'm going to start with some of the ones that have been pre-submitted. And so the first one, which is a really good one, it says, so what property changes are allowed without having to consult? And I'm assuming consult means with a board or commission. Bob, I think you would be a great one to answer that. And if you want to pass it along to someone on your team, feel free to do that too. Sure,
that's a really good question. And the answer is that it depends. You know, in some ways you do have to have a fairly good knowledge of the zoning ordinance. We try to make it as straightforward and simple as possible, but inevitably there are rules and then exceptions to the rules and so forth. The best way really to find out what you can do is to consult with folks in the city. I do recommend that you try to get yourself acquainted with the ordinance and how it works. A good place to start is if you go to our planning department's website and you look for the zoning ordinance, one of the things you'll find is a handbook that helps you understand how the ordinance is written. And it's always a good idea to try to figure it out yourself. But you should always confirm that what you can do is allowed by right. Chances are, if you're going to do work on your property that's more than sort of, you know, gardening or painting your house, you know, if you're gonna pick up a hammer, you're gonna pick up a saw, it's often going to be the case that you're going to need a building permit. And the building permit application process is always the sort of portal to first determining if what you're going to do is compliant with zoning. There are many things that you're allowed to do without needing to go through any special process other than filing for a building permit. For example, if you are in a single family zone and you plan to build a single family house and you plan to do it in such a way that it conforms completely to every regulation of the zoning ordinance, you don't need to go to the zoning board. You don't need to go to any special commission, unless of course you're in a historic district. So there's a rule with an exception. If you are in a historic district, that house is going to get reviewed by our historic district commission. But if you're not, it won't, so long as you comply. So I hope that gives you a general answer. If you have more specific questions, feel free to ask those and always follow up with us.
Thank you for that, Bob. I want to acknowledge I see some questions coming in through the chat, and I also, Andrew, I see that your hand's up, but I'm going to do one more pre-submitted questions and then I'm going to go over it to you, Andrew. This one I think is for you, Jason. It's more of a comment than a question, and it was about replacement windows. So would you mind, I think you deal with a lot of that with the Historic District Commission. Would you talk to the audience a little bit about replacement windows and the role they play and some of the work that you do?
Sure, happy to do that, Catherine. Replacement windows, again, within a historic district, everything is kind of on a case-by-case basis. So a lot of things can determine what you're allowed to do and what the process will be at that time. For instance, we have what's called repair, replacement in kind as one of the category. So if you have existing single pane wood windows and you want to put new single pane windows, that's a staff review. In most cases where people are looking to say put in insulated replacement windows from a single pane window, then that's going to go to the board for review at that point. And the board has a set of standards and guidelines for that. We have a specific thing, that policy that talks about windows, how the commission thinks about windows, and what we're looking for as far as documentation. But the answer is, I guess, in one way, is that it is possible to have replacement windows installed on a historic property.
That was really
And
helpful, Jason.
Yep.
Oh, do you have anything else to add? I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and if you have, if anyone has, if you have a more specific question, again, feel free to reach out to me and I can look at the specifics of your particular location.
Thank you. Andrew, can you unmute yourself? Awesome.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes, please. And thanks to the staff. This is a really helpful presentation. So at risk of straying from the more technical nature of this presentation, there's a growing discourse across the country about how zoning can be impacting the affordability of housing by basically limiting the amount of housing that can be built to meet demand. And so for any other type of market, if the demand goes high, then supply goes up to meet it, and that keeps prices at a reasonable level. So it seems like one of the primary remedies for this is to upzone dramatically. And I guess my question is, for the staff that can remember back to the 2014 changes, was there any sort of advocacy surrounding any dramatic upzoning, or even some of the more progressive areas of the country are now eliminating single family zoning? So like, did that topic come up, and how was it received?
I think I could address that one, and Bonnie might have some more perspective on this as well. In 2014, we definitely looked at upzoning, and in particular, it was based on our comprehensive plan participation process, where we asked a fundamental question of where should we grow within the city. We anticipated that we would be growing, and we wanted to make sure that we were thinking rationally into the future about how that growth would happen and where it would happen. And we did a couple of things. One was that in the residential areas, we mainly said that those are areas of stability and not significant amounts of growth. But one thing that we did do was we recognized that there was an awful lot of non-conforming development. In other words, the development that had been built going back decades that no longer conformed with the zoning ordinance, because we had artificially placed limits on dwelling unit density and on things like height and setback. What that meant was that under the pre-2014 ordinance, you weren't allowed to build much of the historic fabric of the city that we all know and love. So in 2014, we made changes that allowed for slightly higher densities in residential zones, consistent with what had been previously established. Also, we allowed for dimensional regulations that allowed slightly bigger buildings. And also with respect to where we grow, we did some upzoning of our commercial corridors, and we made greater allowance in some of our industrial areas that were transitioning into mixed use for higher density. We eliminated any kind of density caps in these zones, so you didn't need a certain amount of land area for the number of apartments that you were going to be building. And in many cases, we also reduced or eliminated parking requirements so that you didn't have to take up so much of your land with parking. But looking forward, we just completed a anti-displacement and affordable housing strategy that is
Right.
revisiting this question of upzoning. And there are a lot of policies in there that do involve looking at our zoning ordinance and trying to find some opportunities for more areas that could accommodate higher density. It's a challenge. We always have to balance that with people's concerns about community character. But we think that there are a lot of very sensible policies in this document, and we look forward to discussing further with the Plan Commission and with the City Council.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that anti-displacement document, that really came out really well. Great job for the staff.
Catherine, I'd like to just add one thing to that conversation, which is that, so I think, going through the 2014 changes, many of those changes were very progressive and sort of very forward-looking and addressed a lot of these underlying issues that Bob described. And the comprehensive housing strategy is really tailored to our conditions in Providence neighborhoods. And so a lot of the things that we hear about from other places, like, for example, you mentioned eliminating single family zoning, which was, had sort of been a hot topic. So places like Minneapolis and other cities around the country are neighborhoods of single family homes. So I think in Minneapolis, about 70% of the land area is zoned for single family use. And in Providence, it's about 13% of our land is really reserved for R1 or single family zoning. And even within those R1 zones, there's an incredible amount of kind of grandfathered in multi-family dwellings within that. So I just wanted to add the point that, the individual conditions of each city are so important to keep in mind when we're thinking about what solutions kind of work best for Providence.
Great, thank you.
Thank you all. That great questions, great answers, and keep them coming. I see them coming in right now. I have one that I wanted to put out from Joel. This might be for you, Bob, or it might be for Alexis. I'll let you guys decide who you think's the best to speak on this. But the question is, what percentage of parcels in the city are in conformance with the current zoning ordinance?
I'm going to let Alexis take a stab at that one.
Bob, thanks for that. I think the basic answer to the question is that I don't know. So to be very honest and transparent, there are, and it depends on exactly what you're asking about. When we talk about conformance, there are so many different aspects of conformity. There are the current standards for new lots, which again, there are many categories for them, but if we're just talking about residential, new residential lots need to be a minimum of 5,000 square feet. But now that you've all had Dave's rundown of the zoning map or the Where's Your Parcel and What's My Zone, Where's My Parcel app, you can all zoom throughout the city of Providence and see how many of the residential parcels are absolutely nowhere close to 5,000 square feet. So in that sense, they are non-conforming. But the zoning ordinance does a really good job of speaking to what can happen for a new lot, what can happen for old lots that may be non-conforming, and in the plethora of different ways that they can be developed. So Joel, it's a big question, and I wish I had a more concise answer for you. As I think most of the folks on here know, if you want to give me a call or an email to talk about a specific property, I'm always more than willing to do so. So please, if you have a question about a specific property, be in touch. And Bob, I'll kick it back to you to see if you have anything more to add on that big non-answer I just gave.
Yeah, no, I think it's right. We have done a few studies in residential areas to see, for example, how many non-conforming dwellings there are, in say R1, where we allow just single family dwellings, how many 2-family, 3-family, or multi-family dwellings we have. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but it is significant. If you do a map, say, of zoning and compare it to the actual land uses on the ground, the differences are significant. I think that it's actually, just as an informational piece, it's probably worthwhile exploring that. I think when we have an opportunity, we're going to do that with respect specifically to use. But as Alexis said, that's only one component. Non-conforming by dimension, by setback, by height, building materials and so forth. Many thousands.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, Joel, for that really good question. Here's another good question that I think a few of you may want to weigh in on, and it's a little long, so I'm going to read it. So I apologize for me reading it. So the question is, what is the principle behind when one needs to seek a zoning change versus some sort of waiver / exemption? So they're looking at the zoning mapper and they can see a few commercial establishments, like restaurants, cafes, et cetera, on the east side that are in this area that look to be exclusively residential.
Well, so that gets at this question of nonconformity, and I always talk about the fact that there are a handful of different ways for something that's not allowed to exist. In other words, if you do have if you're in a residential zone and there's a store there or a restaurant where you would think it's not allowed, how did it get to be there? Well, there's a couple of ways. One is that it could have been built before zoning didn't allow it. Maybe it was built before zoning existed. We didn't have zoning until the 1920s. There are many what we call grandfathered uses or legal nonconformities. Or if we amended the zoning ordinance to change the rules and we made something illegal, it's allowed to continue. So that's called legal nonconformity. Another way is that they may have gone to the zoning board and gotten a variance for the use. Zoning board these days doesn't really grant use variances because the standards are very high, but zoning boards of past decades did grant use variances. So that's another way that they could exist. Another thing we did in 2014 is we created a use that we called neighborhood commercial establishment. In certain residential zones, we actually made some of these corner stores and restaurants legal because we recognize that they're actually desirable. They actually add a lot to neighborhoods. And unlike the way we look at legal nonconformities, we don't necessarily want them to go away. So in some cases, we legalize those. But there is a last way that something that's not allowed can exist, and that way is that it's illegal. There are, in many cases, conversions of buildings from one use to another that was never authorized, that was never permitted. There are additional dwelling units that are added to buildings that were never permitted and that violate the zoning ordinance. When we find out about these things, we do issue violations, and in some cases we do take property owners to court. They can always, actually there's one last way to make something legal. If you have a violation or if you want to, or thinking ahead to what you want to do, you can always approach the city council. If something's not allowed, you can ask them to change the ordinance in such a way that would make it legal. And that happens from time to time. The city council has the authority to change the map to put you in a different zone where your proposed use would be allowed. Or they could even change the text of the ordinance to allow certain uses in zones where they previously had not been allowed. And that would be something that might have a citywide effect. So we'd have to think very carefully about it. But a number of different ways for these things to happen.
Thanks, Bob. And I'm coming right back to you because this one was directed towards you. I'm not picking on you, I promise. The question was about, this is from Warren, about institutional master plans. That's a phrase that you used during your presentation. Warren's looking to know what these documents are, if they're public, and how often and through what process can these institutional master plans be altered?
Good question. Yeah, institutional master plans are required of every college and every hospital in the city. And these documents they serve a couple of different purposes. They disclose to the city and to the public what the institutions intend to do over a period of time. We know that these institutions are significant. They have major footprints in the city. They have major impacts on the city, and we want to have some information about what they're planning long-term. So it's a disclosure document. It's also a document that has to be found compliant with the city's comprehensive plan, like every other development project, and with the city's zoning ordinance. So we require the institutions in this master plan to list all proposed new construction on their campuses, except for things like routine maintenance, but all new buildings, all demolition, all new parking facilities. They have to have an up-to-date traffic and parking plan. So it's kind of a comprehensive look at the existing conditions for the institutions and their proposals going out for a period of 5 years. These plans have to get approved by the City Plan Commission. There has to be a little bit of public outreach before they come into the Plan Commission. They have to hold at least one community meeting before they do so. And they're good for 5 years. If anytime they're amended, that 5-year period extends. But if they expire after 5 years, then the institutions can't get building permits until they come back to get their plans readopted or reapproved. Generally, these plans are on the websites of the institutions. Lately, since we have now started posting all submissions on our website, we're starting to develop a library of these plans on our website as well. But we could always, if anybody ever wants to see a master plan for an institution and can't find it on the institution's website, let us know and we can always get it to you. Alexis?
I just want to chime in, Bob, to let folks know that there are certain smaller scale projects that can happen at an institution that would not require an amendment of their master plan. And those are listed in our zoning ordinance. And again, I'm always happy to help people, walk people through that. But if you see work happening on a site, it may be permitted without a public hearing to change the IMP.
Thank you for that. And I want to be mindful of everyone's time because we said this is going to be an hour and it looks like we have one more question. So that will be perfect because I just, I'm trying to be really respectful of everyone's calendars right now. This last one is actually a really interesting one to potentially end on because it can.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Catherine. I just wanted to note that Councilwoman Anthony had her hand up. So I definitely want to respect her presence here.
Thank you for that, Bob. I did not see that, and we will 100% get to you, Councilwoman. Sorry about that. But here is our second to last question, and this one is about affordable housing. So she's saying, I would love to hear folks weigh in on what they see about the greatest challenges to creating more units of affordable housing in Providence.
Well, I can in one word, or 2 words, land and money. The places to build it and the funding necessary to actually build it and support its financial viability. Bonnie?
Yeah, I was going to say it's really a question. It's a math equation and it's a subsidy question. So there's actually a push right now for Rhode Island to get a larger allocation of the low-income housing tax credits that are really essential to getting more units online. So I'm really excited about that, but I think the number one thing we could do to boost housing construction is to have a greater allocation of those 9% low-income housing tax credits, which are such a key part of making those projects work. So it is a question of subsidy.
Thank you. Councilwoman Anthony, do you want to close us out with your question?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I couldn't find my raise hand feature. I wanted to thank everyone, Bonnie, Bob, Catherine, Alexis, everyone today. This was excellent. I wish that there were more people attending today because this is just a great outreach and I really appreciate it. I'm just trying to, I have one quick question, and maybe it's not that quick. I'm trying to figure out, so if the zoning board isn't, and I understand granting use variances because it's such a high standard that, you know, the applicant really can't meet those standards. So then they go to the city council for a zone change, but the CPC has to weigh in on that. Is that correct? I'm just getting my,
That's correct. The City Plan Commission by state law is required to advise the council on every amendment to the zoning ordinance.
okay, so then you, and then what are you using for your criteria in those zone change situations?
Yeah, so the City Plan Commission, again, under state law, whenever there's a change to the zoning ordinance, the Plan Commission has to make findings of compliance with the city's comprehensive plan and also with what are called the purposes of zoning. Those are enumerated at the beginning of the state zoning law and our zoning ordinance. Things like protecting the public safety, health, and welfare, and providing for a range of housing opportunities and so forth. There's a number of very general purposes of zoning, but fundamental is compliance with the comprehensive plan.
Okay, and then just so, you know, just to be sure, so any substantive change to the comp plan is, I would assume I mean, substantive change to the zoning ordinance also would have to be in compliance with the comp plan, correct?
That's right. And in some cases, changes to the zoning ordinance may be inconsistent with the comp plan. And from time to time, we will see petitions to change the zoning ordinance that are accompanied by petitions to change the comprehensive plan as well. And that adds to the process. But both the comp plan and the zoning ordinance are reviewed by the City Plan Commission and the City Council.
Okay, great. Well, I am just so appreciative of this opportunity. This was just wonderful. I just was, how was this published? I'm just wondering, because I know we got invitations as city council members, but for the public, how did they figure this out today? Because I wish more had attended.
So I'm happy to answer that question.
Thank
So
you.
we made sure we circulated this through social media, through all our website. We did some direct outreach to the neighborhood associations. We really tried to find people and meet them where they were so they could come and join us today. I will say we did have over 60 RSVPs, but it is hard to sneak away sometime at lunchtime. So as Bonnie mentioned, we're going to continue to do this quarterly. So we might play around with different times and dates to see what works best for people, because obviously we want people to see this and be here and be a part of it. But we're also going to be, this recording is going to be available as of tomorrow. I'll push it out via social media, put it out through their website. If people have ideas about better ways to reach people, please tell us, let us know. Anything, if the council office has ideas about how we can help get people to these events, we're here to serve, and we want people